Hello and welcome. Bakhmut has fallen after months and months of bitter fighting. But while this is a Ukrainian defeat, at the same time, Western fighter jets appear on the horizon and Wagner is probably leaving Ukraine. This and more in the Situation Report. In the last couple of days, there's almost daily attacks with cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones. Russia has intensified its air attacks. That obviously leaves the question, how can they even keep doing this when the number of planes of cruise missiles were supposed to run out? We have fresh informations from the Ukrainian military intelligence, the GUR, auto-translated here with Google. According to them, the Russians have increased the production and can now produce 25 caliber per month, 35 KH-101, 2 Kinzhal, and 5 Iskander ballistic missiles. In the last few days, one of the big news was that the US has now permitted and agreed to help with the training of F-16 of Ukrainian pilots on the F-16s and other fourth generation pilots. According to Yahoo News, which we have here, the report is that Ukrainian pilots were actually trying to they tried them out to have on they tried them out on F-16 in simulators. And their performance was so well, they adapted so fast that according to Yahoo News, the assessment of their abilities was they will be able to fly the F-16 within 4 months, not within 18 that are usually necessary. Whether that's going to be actually possible in a vast number will obviously be a different question. How much of this will include shortcuts that are legitimate? For instance, air-to-air refueling will not be needed for F-16s in Ukrainian hands, but the question will obviously we'll have to see how far it can be shortened. This, though, shows us that it's no longer a question when Western jets are going to come. If several nations start training the pilots, the delivery of planes is no longer an issue. And according to the reports here, the US are now saying they won't block the exports of F-16 jets to Ukraine. That means that the US, as the license holder, the producer of the planes or the main component delivery nation, basically the US has a veto right to whomever those planes are being given, like Germany, for instance, has with the Leopard 2. And there, according to media reports, we have CNN here, the US is not going to block deliveries. In total, that means that Western jets will appear in Ukraine within the coming months. There are several calculations how many are possible. Right now, the optimistic calculations talk about 70 jets that are possible. Whether it'll be focused on F-16 only or other jets are also possible is obviously a different question, which will also depend on how many pilots Ukraine can actually train and send for training. There are several other planes outside of the F-16 also up for debate, be it the F-18 or maybe French Mirage 2000s. Regardless, so far we already have news that the Netherlands have cancelled their contract with Draken International, who wanted to buy the F-16s from the Dutch military, from the Dutch Air Force. They wanted to use them. I think Draken is like for target display and training. So the Dutch initially intended to sell them to them. Now they are not being sold, so we all can guess where they are going to be given to. But with all that good news, it should obviously also have some caveat in this regard. Those are not high-end jets. So we are not talking about F-16s that are rolling off the assembly line right now, which have the most modern avionics, most modern radar and sensors, etc. All of this. Often we are talking about jets on a technical level 20 years ago or something like this that have not been modernized recently, that haven't received the most modern radar systems. The F-16 that are up for debate are not not comparable with the most modern version, but they will still be useful, they will still be helpful, and they are likely still better than what Ukraine can assemble right now in terms of technical abilities when it comes in comparison to for instance, the Ukrainian MiG-29. Also, there are reports that from the US, there are officials saying that a Patriot battery in Ukrainian hands has shot down at least one Russian jet on long range. That could be a reference to the Bryansk shotdowns, where 4 to 5 planes were shot down within a few minutes. Either it was manpads or air to air, or it was friendly fire. The speculations are wild in this regard, but it could be a reference in this regard that it might have actually been a Ukrainian Patriot battery taking out those jets fairly deep within Russian territory. I think it was 60 kilometers deep within Russian territory, where the Russians didn't expect those and thus were unaware of them being targeted. That would also explain the vehemence with the Russians used to trying to take out the Patriot battery in Ukraine, which, according to American sources, is already back in action and already ready to fire again. So the Russian attempt to take it out, including with 6 Kinshal, at least according to the official reports, was unsuccessful. When we go to the front line on the eastern front north of the Seversky Donetsk, the river here, we have reports of fighting here northeast of Kupiansk. Mazyutivka, there are some Russian claims that they've gained the high ground west of it, which would mean they've crossed the Oskil River. There are some claims that they already did. I see no proof whatsoever for that, but there's even claims that Mazyutivka might not have fallen to the Russians. Also, the attacks are going in the direction of Snikivka. I cannot confirm any successes in this regard. Novosilivske is also seeing some fighting, also no changes in territory here, and the Russians themselves say they defeated 2 Ukrainian attacks in the direction of Chervono-Popivka, which is here and would obviously help cut the lines of communication between Svatove and Krimina. I have no specific new information about the fighting around Krimina itself, which is likely that it's still happening, but at least no fresh reports. South of the Seversky Donetsk, we have continued fighting. The big news is obviously still around Bakhmut. The Ukrainians have liberated a little bit of territory around Sakoivanseti, which is a small town north of Bakhmut. According to reports, the Russians retreated there, and supposedly they even retreated from the town itself. The Ukrainians just haven't entered it yet. I cannot fully confirm to which degree, but apparently there was some minor Ukrainian advances there. Other than that, fighting is continuing around Bakhmut itself. The Ukrainians are claiming they have advanced between 500 meters and 1 kilometer. Not much to confirm there, though, so we cannot really say how far the counterattacks were successful in their continuous advance. But we do know that there are still Ukrainian attacks happening. But the big news, obviously, is from Bakhmut itself. Russia has managed to capture the rest of the so-called citadel, those high buildings here, high-rise buildings here, that in the last situation report, the Ukrainians were still in control of everything south of that road here. Now this has fallen. I see some reports according to which there might still be some presence in the smaller buildings to its west, but that seems unlikely. And even if they are just on borrowed times, because their line of communication would be threatened and the Russians would have the high ground here. So it's likely that the map, which is pro-Ukrainian, is correct here, that this whole area up to Khomove is also being lost. The only thing that is not completely certain is the southernmost tip of Bakhmut. It's still possible here is an industrial area which would have more solid buildings, so theoretically the Ukrainians could have kept fighting here. I have no absolute confirmation that it's actually being held. The Wagner is saying that they fully captured Bakhmut. We don't really know, but the fact is it's fallen. So unless a huge Ukrainian counterattack is going to happen in the next 12 to 24 hours, even if at the time of the recording this southern tip is still in Ukrainian hands, it seems unlikely that they'll be able to hold it, as the lines of communication would be fairly exposed, and withdrawing from that point would probably be much more sensible in regards to the survivability of the troops here. Fighting for that tip, continued fighting for that and reinforcing it seems highly unreasonable. I said further attacks here, but we from anything we know, the Ukrainians have not reached the high grounds close to Klishchivka, despite some reports. And I mean, for a week now, there are reports that they already captured and liberated Klishchivka. There is no confirmation whatsoever. It's extremely likely that the Russians still hold the high grounds here, but the advances have been made south of Ivanivske. Obviously, that will have allowed the Ukrainians to withdraw from Bakhmut itself. Around Avdiivka, there's some fighting reported, no advances whatsoever, after there has been some minor gains at Krasnohorivka a couple of days ago, but we don't see really anything happening here, any changes in territory. And in Marinka, fighting was also continuing. There are some claims that the fighting in Marinka, the Russians had some advances. Again, claims that the Ukrainians only control one last square kilometer. Whether that is true or not, we don't really know. The Russians have claimed a lot here in Marinka. According to them, they should have captured it long as of now for quite some time, which is at least not true as of now. Not true. There is pictures, though, according to which, and reports is the reports are saying that a full company of T-90M tanks were destroyed roughly 4 kilometers to the east of Marinka. They were in reserve, in preparation there, were spotted by Ukrainians and destroyed with HIMARS, so that the Russians might have suffered serious losses here. Further south, we have reports of a Ukrainian counterattack here at Solotke. No confirmation that it has achieved anything whatsoever. At Vuhledar, we have reports about Ukrainian attacks to the south here into the Russian-held territory, but again, no confirmation of successes whatsoever. There are some reports about attacking by both sides. Ukrainians are reporting Russian attacks and vice versa for Western Donetsk, so there's some minor fighting happening here, but as said, it's minor. There are no huge advances, no huge attempts, no battalions marching up and trying to break the front line. It's probably more or less probing the front line, what is happening here. When it comes to the southern area in general, we have a huge attack on Mariupol. The attack itself has the attack has hit targets in Mariupol on the airport. That happened, and probably there are some claims that it was with Storm Shadow, for instance, and now there are satellite pictures indicating that it was an underground bunker that was destroyed by the Ukrainians here. We obviously have no clue whether that attack, what damage it did, whatever the claims from the Ukrainian sides are in this regard. Generally, when it comes to the front line, we can report that there are reports about significant reinforcements around Bakhmut. The Russians are pulling reserves and forces to reinforce the Bakhmut and to prevent the flanks from Bakhmut from collapsing under the pressure from Ukrainian attacks. Reports are that those reinforcements come from Avdiivka, from Marinka, but also from southern Zaporizhzhia. So basically, the Ukrainians are drawing in reinforcements from other parts of the front that should, at least in theory, weaken them. Those reinforcements show their effect, though. The Ukrainian attacks, while they still continue, they seem to slow down. The Ukrainians claim north of Bakhmut they gained 500 meters, south they gained 1 kilometer. Just to put it in perspective, you have the 1 kilometer here, so 1 kilometer would not even be from here to that unit sign. It would be roughly to this here. Yeah, we see now 900, so more or less this is a kilometer. That's the most the Ukrainians themselves claimed they liberated. Whether that is exaggerated or not, we don't know. So we see that the reinforcement the Russians brought in are showing some effect. Still, though, Bakhmut has fallen. As said, even if the last remnants are still in Ukrainian hands at the time of the recording, there are already reports that it has completely fallen, and it would just be a matter of hours until the rest is captured. At least that's what I would expect. For the last 60%, to capture the last 60% of Bakhmut, the Russians took roughly 2 months. Since January, they tried to establish an envelopment around Bakhmut by pushing in the flanks in the north and in the south. That made it much more difficult for the Ukrainians to bring in air defense and counter and artillery for counter battery fire, as obviously anything they push in here can be shot from the sides and would be highly vulnerable. That weakened the Ukrainian position, but at the same time, direct support for Bakhmut was obviously still possible. Artillery positioned somewhere here can easily shoot into Bakhmut and support the units here. What was not possible, though, or much more difficult, is with artillery behind their own front lines that is not moved into the envelopment here around Bakhmut to do counter battery fire. So basically to, for instance, hit and destroy Russian artillery that would be in Pervomaiske or anywhere like this or further to the east, as the distances would force and as the development of the front line would force the Ukrainian artillery back. That weakened the Ukrainian position, as well as the fact that the Russians held fire control over the lines of communication into Bakhmut for the majority of the time. But in the end, the Ukrainians were able to hold out for several months, where many people would have not given them a week at the same time. Whether it was worth it or not, the exchange in losses from both sides will only be possible to be determined after we know the actual numbers, maybe some years after the war, and when we see how the war actually ends. Right now, obviously, the huge advantage is that the Ukrainians are pulling in reserves there, that the Wagner seems to be close to being a spent force, and that right now Bakhmut has reached such an importance that Russia seems to be weakening even the southern front as we speak of, just to stop the Ukrainians from advancing anywhere further here. A quick collapse of the front line here is not to be expected. As we can see here on the map, the high ground is Bakhmut is like at the bottom of a valley. The high ground around it, most of it is in Ukrainian hands. Some of it is recently reconquered. So while Ivanivske will probably be on the front line now, or might even be given up, the high grounds behind it should be more than capable of holding the Russians back for quite some additional time, even if they keep attacking as of now. So what some propagandists claimed, that a collapse in Bakhmut will hand over Konstantinivka or maybe even Kramatorsk and Sloviansk to the Russians can be denied. I don't think there's a realistic chance for that. When it comes to further developments, we have reports of an IED attack on a railway line on the Crimea. 8 trucks, 8 what is it called? Lorries? No, 8 wagons. 8 wagons derailed. The Russians said they repaired it by now, and whoever did it is unknown. And when it comes to force generation and troops, we have a report here from it should also be here. We have a report here from one of the big Wagner affiliated Telegram channels that, according to them, with a source within Wagner has started to withdraw its best forces from Bakhmut, but not just to deploy it to other regions, but to actually deploy it to Sudan. Wagner supposedly made a contract with the rapid support forces in Sudan, which are currently fighting a civil war against the government. The mercenaries are being deployed to Sudan as well as weapons, and there are debates whether Wagner should move its main seat of operation into Sudan, and even some reports are whether they should be renamed to musicians or orchestra in this regard. The only one that is being left are the unnecessary fighters that are being held in the meat grinder, whereas the elite troops would be moved to Africa. And before that, the other Russian channels were reporting that Prigozhin had lost the majority of his supports and contacts in the Russian government and within the Russian elites. The only reason that Prigozhin is still alive would be that, according to those reports, is that Putin has not decided yet to give up on Prigozhin. Shoigu supposedly wanted to get rid of Prigozhin, and we can guess that would have been falling out of a window, but Putin didn't give permission to do that. Shoigu wanted to get rid of him because of his failures on the battlefield, and obviously being insulted almost daily by Prigozhin surely hasn't helped to warm up the relations between the two. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that hasn't written an article about the differences in support from for Ukraine from Britain to the US. And according to them, the Special Air Service, the Special Reconnaissance Regiment, and the SBS, the Special Boat Service, so basically the Tier 1 operators inside of the Royal Armed Forces, are in Ukraine close to the front lines, basically doing reconnaissance and consulting. They are not actively fighting, but they're close behind the front line to help the Ukrainians fight the Russians, something the Americans, according to these reports, are not willing to do, are not taking the risks to do, but the British government is willing to take that risk. The Russian Supreme Court has declared that it's everyone who is voluntarily doing a capitulation, giving himself up against the Ukrainians, will be tried for treason. If someone has been wounded, been unconscious, anything like this, then it would not be liable. But other than that, while someone has still been able to fight back, it would be a crime and thus threatened with a high prison sentence. Medvedev, the former president and now what you want to call him, rogue within the Russian government. He's the one basically going mad all the time on Twitter. He said that since January 1st, 117,400 contracts have been signed for the Russian armed forces with volunteer units, which would mean that in the last 5 months, Russia has been able to recruit 117,400 men additionally to the mobilization to bolster up its units. Whether that's true or not, we obviously have no way to conclude, but it might well be possible within the realms of possibility. We should not forget that Russia has 144 million citizens, so to find 100,000 among them might be possible. And there are reports that Kazakhstan is one of the main hubs for drones and microelectronics when it comes to support Russia to deliver them on. Kazakhstan is apparently playing a huge role. From Russia, we also have the report that 3 scientists that have been involved intimately in the development of the Kinshal hypersonic missile have been arrested. The first guesses were that they might have been arrested because they sold Putin a super weapon that isn't one, after supposedly all 6 Kinshals have been shot down in that attack on the Patriot battery in Kiev. But the reports are saying no, they have actually been already arrested in the past year, so not directly related to the current events, and they are being arrested for treason. So some guesses is that either they sold some of the technology to the Chinese, or maybe to some Western intelligence, handed over some trade secrets about this. Whatever it is, I don't know it yet, but apparently it was not that they sold a super weapon that actually turned out to be just a regular ballistic missile that is air launched. Xi Jinping had a conference with the Central Asian heads of state in Beijing. And the interesting part is that Putin or any Russian representative wasn't there, while all the heads of state from those Central Asian states came to see Xi Jinping in Beijing. Russia is traditionally seeing the former Soviet Union, so all the Central Asian states except for Afghanistan, as its sphere of influence, as its backyard. So inviting them to China without inviting a Russian representative as well is a huge snub for the Russian side. And when it comes to international support, we have a report from Norway. According to them, they are going to deliver 3 counter-battery radars and 8 long-range rocket artillery of the MLRS type. It's supposedly M270, like you can see here, that is going to be handed over to the Ukrainians. The US also, there's a report that the US calculated the deliveries wrongly. So according to that report in the New York Times, the calculations to value the goods that were handed over to Ukraine were too generous. According to that, the number stated initially was 3 billion too high. By evaluating material from stocks with too much value. I don't know if they took the production value from what an M113 would have cost when it was built and added the inflation to it or whatever it was. So the calculations, according to the reports, are not only were they 3 billion too high, but that would mean that the confirmation, the legal requirements to deliver weapons to Ukraine included 3 billion more that were actually delivered, which obviously means the US can deliver weaponry for an additional 3 billion without any additional confirmation, legal requirements or whatsoever. Because while there are prominent modern Western weaponry, we should not close our eyes that Ukraine is also getting a lot of material that is basically hand-me-down, that is in storage, that was due to destruction, be it the German Marder IFVs that are being decommissioned, be it the basically ancient M113 Hawk air defense batteries we are talking about. All of this is being handed to Ukraine, and all of it is of use in Ukraine. It should not be diminished, its value, but at the same time, those are hand-me-downs. Those are that is stuff that is decommissioned sometimes for decades, like the Leopard 1. But depending on how you calculate it, obviously the value can change dramatically. And finally, we have a report here that Wagner Group had bought 20,000 helmets from a Chinese company. So in this regard, military equipment, even though it was not weaponry, was delivered to Russian fighting forces. Overall, that's it from today. So while on the front line, not much is happening, even though the Bakhmut has fallen, the big news will obviously be that F-16s seem to be on the way now. So leave your comment in the comment section. Say what you think about how much effect the F-16 might have on the war in Ukraine. This is really appreciated and it helps with the algorithm. Also, if you like this, please hit the like button. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos like this. This channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. So if you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting the channel. And that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.